Imagine a world where water is more important than money. In this world, the apocalypse began with ground temperatures rising up to 100 degrees, and anyone who touched the floor melted instantly. The only way to survive was to stay inside and find water, but supplies are so rare that people would pay the ultimate price just to suck on some sausages. Suchen was a brokiest sim who managed to survive with his girlfriend till he ran out of supplies and literally got stabbed in the back. He was reborn 1 month before the end of the world and given abilities that allow him to store trillions worth of supplies. However, instead of warning everyone, Suchen decides to become the biggest menace and steal all the supplies to get revenge. Now at this time, the Earth was experiencing a series of natural disasters, causing a shortage of essential supplies. Due to the death toll, passengers on a bus are fleeing to Ronin City when a lady realizes she forgot to take any supplies along. A fellow passenger breaks the news that the warehouses in Ronin City have all been looted of supplies worth hundreds of billions. However, Suchen interrupts and says it's actually tens of trillions, and it's only the surface because the end of the world is coming. The male passenger says he looks forward to the end of the world since every living being will finally be on equal footing. Suchen looks the naive idiot dead in the eyes and says that they would never be equal, and he knows this because he's seen it with his own eyes. He was just an ordinary delivery man when earthquakes started ripping through cities and monsters began rising from the depths of the earth. Due to the abnormal release of solar energy, more monsters began creeping their way to the surface and the entire world changed. However, this new world order brought about a scarcity of supplies so bad that just a packet of noodles sent former neighbors into battle royales for food. And you'd be surprised what the women would do for a couple of sausages. Well, the things they'd agree to. Somehow, Suchen had been reborn from the old world and sent back in time to 1 month before the apocalypse began. The woman on the bus is scared by Suchen's story and clings to him, thinking that a nice supply of melon juice would be enough to get him to comfort her. However, Suchen coldly dumps her out and says he has more important things to do. After getting off the bus, Suchen continues to put his preparation for the apocalypse in motion. As he arrives at a warehouse, he declares that the most important thing in the hellish world to come will be supplies, and unlike in his previous life, he intends to be prepared. Now Suchen wasn't a stranger to this building, since this is where he worked. He grabbed his coat and ID and headed in, but his line manager reminded him that even 21 seconds of lateness would cost him half a day's salary. This was no surprise for Suchen. His Dutch bag boss made away with his entire salary once the apocalypse hit in the old world, but now he intends to even the score. With just one step, he begins to activate his first ability, Space Unfold. Swirling beams of energy emerge and begin detecting all the items in the warehouse and automatically storing them. It takes a couple of moments, but the blue light wraps around every shelf and corner of the facility and sucks up its contents. Suchen stands proudly as he boasts of his ultimate spatial ability. With this ability, he's dried up 2 freshwater lakes and plundered countless cities doomed to be wrecked by the apocalypse anyway. If a packet of instant noodles would be considered a luxury, just imagine how much it would cost to get fresh food. And the best part, time stays frozen in his space so nothing spoils regardless of how long it's kept. Suchen can finally save himself those manly tears shed from eating dirt to survive. Once he's done collecting the supplies and looking through the inventory, Suchen starts to relax. However, when 3 co-workers walk in and see that the warehouse has been cleaned out down to the last cockroach, they immediately start asking where everything went. So Suchen looks them straight in the face and admits that he took it all. His manager doesn't understand how this is possible and orders his men to arrest the bastard. But Suchen activates his kanwi and starts to slip away, assuring his boss that at least he won't be late to work anymore. As soon as Suchen vanishes, the 3 idiots are left wondering how he managed to vanish into thin air. But on the other side of the building, Suchen emerges and sticks the landing. This escape was possible thanks to his second ability, Space Jump, which allows him to shuttle within a 3-meter space. This would allow him to quickly enter abandoned buildings, steal supplies, and escape. And even better, when the mutant Ninja Turtles attack, this ability can save his life. Well, that concludes his zero-cost shopping, so Suchen begins to head out when his phone starts blowing up. When he checks, he sees a news statement about the earthquake, encouraging everyone not to panic as it wouldn't affect their daily lives. However, Suchen knows better, that the end of the world is approaching. Suddenly, Suchen's eyes fill with rage as he sees a call from his girlfriend, Xiao Yu. He takes a deep breath, sensing what's about to happen, and picks up his phone. Immediately, Xiao Yu starts giving him hell for ignoring her and putting his house up for sale, warning him that no woman would want to be with a homeless man. The heartless even suggests giving her his house as a gift while she dresses up from playing tennis with another man. However, Su Chen doesn't blink as he asks her if she's done with her mindless ranting, so she switches up and tells him she'll give him another chance if he transfers ownership to her. Su Chen tells her she's on her way back to Shangdu and hangs up on her. That's when Su Chen reveals that in his previous life, he simped over this cheap hoe for 5 years during the apocalypse, doing everything he could to find supplies so she could survive. The bitch would be dead without him, but how did she repay him? She connived with her weasel-faced bestie, who took him out so he could stick his sausage in with his corpse still in the room. Xiao Yu was apparently fine with any man being on top, as long as he was competent enough to provide for her and play a good tennis match in bed. And while those two got busy, Su Chen lay there regretting that he had ever trusted such a two-faced snake. But now that he's been given a second chance, he'll make sure Xiao Yu and Hou Yu pay the ultimate price. However, they won't get some lame-ass Cersei Lannister death. Instead, they'll taste the pain he experienced for the last 5 years 1,000 times over till he's satisfied. Su Chen refocuses on his apocalypse survival plan, but realizes the remaining things on his list can only be bought with money, so his next mission is to get caked. He immediately calls up his real estate agent and agrees to sell his house for half the price on the condition that he gets the cash up front and right now. Later, Xiao Yu and Hou Yu wait outside the real estate company when Su Chen pops out of a cab. Xiao Yu scolds him for keeping her waiting so long, but Su Chen tells her to move that twig she calls a body aside, shocking her. Hou Yu holds up a bat, thinking he can bully the scrawny-looking busboy into giving them the house, but Su Chen reaches out, grabs his neck, and manhandles the damn fool. Once Hou Yu begins to see stars, Su Chen slams him into the ground and tells him they can keep the rest of his stuff if they want. Su Chen almost forgets his plan and begins to choke the life out of Hou Yu till Xiao Yu screams for him to stop, calling him a murderer. Su Chen bitch slaps the shit out of her, and Xiao Yu stares in disbelief, looking like she's about to piss herself, but Su Chen's too busy, squeezing Hou Yu's pipes to notice. Finally, he lets go and gives him that Sukuna look, promising him he won't die so quickly. Hou Yu quickly staggers back coughing while Xiao Yu rushes to his side to see if he's okay. Somehow, Xiao Yu still doesn't get the message and demands that Su Chen kneel before and beg her forgiveness if he still hopes to marry her in this lifetime. Immediately, Su Chen shoots them the coldest stare since Levi saw the beast titan, and this time they get the message and run off. After, Su Chen meets with his agent, who offers to buy the house right away. The agent thinks Su Chen must be dumb as hell to sell an over $1 million house for just 700 bags and plans to resell it and make a profit in no time. Su Chen remains calm and agrees to the fishy deal, but insists that he get the full payment that day. The agent says yes faster than a desperate gold digger and agrees to have the ownership transferred next Monday. Su Chen is pleased with this deal because by next Monday, the agent would have his pick of houses to choose from if he dares to live in them, of course. He looks at his phone and sees the 700,000 sitting pretty, which concludes his deal with the agent. Despite the several natural disasters taking place around the world, Shangdu happens to be located inland, so they haven't witnessed any tsunamis or volcanic eruptions. What's more, the news keeps debunking the rumors, so life is largely still peaceful in the city, making it the perfect spot for Su Chen's plans. Suddenly, he notices a flyer for fast loans, and in no time, he's on the phone with one of them, asking if he can mortgage his house with a property certificate. He heads downtown for a one-on-one meeting, and when he arrives at the loan company, he gets told that his house isn't worth that much. Su Chen realizes that he's sitting across from Hou Yu's older brother, whose haircut is just as unfortunate. No wonder he died in the mouths of a mutant beast, since he looks like a meatball. Dahai tells him he'll only get 500,000, but he needs to leave his property certificate with him. Su Chen demands he bump it up to 600,000 and pays everything now, assuring him that he would make a profit within a week and pay it all back. Dahai thinks Su Chen is just some desperate gambler who could even sell his parents just to keep playing, so he agrees to the arrangement as long as his property gets mortgaged in his company. And just like that, Su Chen receives an alert for another 600,000. Meanwhile, Xiao Yu and Hou Yu arrive outside. Xiao Yu still can't believe Su Chen would actually lay hands on her and intends to make him pay, while Hou Yu suggests they get his big brother to take his life. Speaking of the devil, they notice Su Chen walking down the street and wonder what he could possibly be doing in this part of the city, so Xiao Yu suggests they follow him and find out. Su Chen arrives at the Green City Hotel, remembering that it was one of the only buildings that withstood seawater backflow, rapid freezing, and other natural disasters. Su Chen has his eyes set on the presidential suite, which is well-equipped and even has a swimming pool, so he decides that using this building as a base wouldn't be a bad idea. He waltzes right to the front desk, and when the restaurant manager asks how she can assist him, he places an order for 1,000 tables for a banquet. The manager can't believe her ears, but she manages to stay composed and tells him the various options they have per table. In her mind, she thinks the poorly dressed Chad must be some second-generation rich Nepo baby with excess money to spend. Su Chen orders the 10,000 per table option, making his order worth 10 million yuan. Then he offers to pay a deposit of 500,000, and when they deliver to the address a week later, he'll pay the rest of it. The manager wonders why he'd spend so much on a banquet, but she can't afford to fumble this bag and leads him over to make payment. Su Chen knows that soon, even ingredients will cost as much as 500,000, but he believes it's worth it if he can connect with the wealthy. The manager then asks if he's getting hitched or something, so Su Chen confirms that he is and asks her to book the presidential suite for the wedding. Once everything is settled, Su Chen walks out happy to have secured 10 million worth of dishes for just a 500,000 deposit. As for the final payment, well, once the apocalypse hits, even a block of ice would be worth billions, and luckily, he'll have a ton of them. Meanwhile, the manager can't help but think that Su Chen's bride must be really lucky when Xiao Yu calls her attention and asks what Su Chen was just there for. The manager asks who she is, so Xiao Yu explains that Su Chen is her boyfriend. The manager then reveals Su Chen's order for 1,000 tables and the immediate 500,000 deposit, and congratulates her on her booming gold digger hustle. Inside, she thinks Xiao Yu is a measly 7 out of 10 on her best day and wonders why the rich guys always fall for skanks with big melons. Xiao Yu and Hoyu wonder how Su Chen could have the money to pay for a 10 million banquet, but the manager assures her that several trust fund babies tend to hide their identities to make sure that gold diggers like her aren't after their money. Xiao Yu isn't buying this crazy rich Asian's dupe and asks if it's normal for them to disappear and resort to violence too, while Hoyu insists that it's just not possible for him to afford it. However, the manager pulls out the evidence of the 500,000 deposit, and they're both shocked into silence. When they leave, Hoyu starts wondering who he could possibly invite to a 1,000-table banquet. But Xiao Yu is already off into Lululand, thinking he wants to introduce her to all his rich friends. Hoyu asks what they should do next, hoping she'd be in the mood for tennis, but Xiao Yu swats him away and starts to daydream of her life as a rich wife, and is determined to make sure she bags the husband. Meanwhile, Su Chen sits at home, calculating what's left after that deposit. He knows that despite the stolen items, the remaining 800,000 isn't that much, so he figures that he might as well take out some online loans to make up. For the next several minutes, Su Chen downloaded more than 80 loan apps and followed the procedures to loan money ranging from 30 yuan to 30,000. After taking one selfie after the next and passing several facial recognition security measures, Su Chen was able to rack up 977,000 yuan in loans. He relaxed on his bed to rejoice over his success when he realized there was no time to waste and sat back up. Next on his apocalypse list were fireplaces, ice makers, and ice blocks, which usually aren't sold in supermarkets, but thanks to the miracle that is Amazon, he could just order all these online. In his previous life, the world suffered from extreme temperatures, switching between the scorching heat and icy cold, so Su Chen would need as many ice blocks and coal stones as he can get. He dials up a company and asks for the rate of smokeless coal, after which he orders for 2,000 tons of them, and offers to pay a 500,000 deposit till they deliver the full package. Next, he calls up the ice factory to do the same, but they ask him to come in for a face-to-face conversation. On his way to the ice factory, he spots Li Ne with Xiao Yu, claiming that Xiao Yu has been missing him. Su Chen knows not to trust anything Li Ne says, since she's the one who allowed that venomous viper into his house. Su Chen asks if it's really just his house she's missing, so Li Ne claims that Xiao Yu was simply testing him before and tries to gaslight him by saying that he's been making her sad. Xiao Yu even asks him to accompany her on a walk since she's not feeling well and begs him not to stay angry with her. Unfortunately, the raging simp she once knew died in the former life, and this Su Chen doesn't give a shit about her and simply walks away. Xiao Yu stares like she's been transported to an alternate universe, where Su Chen actually has stees, and she's the one begging for his love. Li Na sees him get into a taxi, and suggests they go after him since this might be Xiao Yu's final test. Su Chen arrives at the ice factory, where he meets the manager right outside. The manager comments on how young he is, but Su Chen gets right down to business, and asks how long the ice blocks will take. The manager assures him that their company is best in efficiency, and they can produce 2,000 tons of edible ice in 3 days, but it would cost him 800,000 yuan. Su Chen wastes no time and transfers 100,000 as a deposit, and tells him to deliver to the given address in 3 days to receive the rest of the payment. The manager's eyes reflect his greed as he welcomes Su Chen to do business with them anytime, but finally stops to ask what he needs all this ice for. Su Chen says he plans to donate the ice to a Lashan for charity, and though the manager wonders why on earth he would want to do this, Su Chen gets into a taxi and rides off, leaving the manager impressed. Just then, another taxi pulls up and Xiao Yu comes out, asking what Su Chen asked for since she's his fiancé. The manager wonders what type of Pikachu detective shit this might be and tells her Su Chen's order for 800,000 yuan worth of ice. The girls' jaws couldn't have dropped faster, and they figure that Su Chen really must be a trust fund baby cause who spends that much on some freaking ice. Lita asks the man what Su Chen plans to do with the ice, and when he reveals his plan to donate it to Alashan charity, the girls don't know what to make of it. Meanwhile, Su Chen's finally done purchasing all his items and can enjoy some downtime before the apocalypse kicks off. He heads to a fancy restaurant, remembering how in his past life he was always working and even going to small cafes was a luxury for him. A waiter shows him to his seat, and while he looks through the menu, he's impressed by how high-end the place is with an average spending of 4 digits. He comes across a question mark for 17,000 yuan, so the waitress explains that it's specially crafted by their head chef, and the details depend on their chef's inspiration. Su Chen's heard enough of the rich bullshit and orders a plate of chef's inspiration. While he waits, he picks up a book about Chinese creatures of the mountains and seas. One of the monsters resembled the mutated sea serpent he encountered in his previous life, but Su Chen likes to think of it as evolution. Before he finishes his thought, a pink-haired woman walks up to him and introduces herself as Duanya, the head chef, then hands him his special order. However, Su Chen recognizes her as Hell's chef from his former life, the chef that could turn decay into food. Su Chen digs in and admits that the taste was worth 17,000 yuan, and even wishes she could cook for him during the apocalypse, but since she could also poison him, it's a hard pass. Meanwhile, Li Na and Xiao Yu follow him to the restaurant, and when Li Na sees that each meal in that restaurant costs at least 10,000 yuan, she tells Xiao Yu that she's hit the jackpot and warns her not to forget her sisters when she's uber rich. Afterward, Su Chen heads to a high-profile bar, remembering that in the apocalypse there won't be places of extravagance anymore, so he figures he might as well enjoy it while it lasts. While he's there, some girls approach him and offer to drink with him. He notices a timid girl who looks like she doesn't want to be there, so her friend explains that it's actually her first time, and since her scumbag boyfriend cheated on her, they brought her out for some fun. The girls lament about guys only being concerned with sleeping women, but Su Chen assures them that a real man's nature is engraved in his bones. His riz doesn't go unnoticed as the girl downs her drink and asks if he's single. When Su Chen doesn't respond, she inches in closer and asks if he's at least willing. At that moment, Xiao Yu and Li Na enter and see him up close and personal with the newborn thought and her wasted friends. When Su Chen hears the girls call out for him, he invites the thought to go upstairs with him while Xiao Yu and Li Na chase after them. They enter a room and Su Chen tries to apologize for the others when the girl suddenly tells him it's her first time. Su Chen can't bear to take advantage of her and flicks her forehead to bring her back to her senses. He warns her not to go out in the coming days and stock up on as much food as possible. But when he tries to warn her not to visit places like this next time, he realizes there won't be a next time. Su Chen leaves the room, realizing that those unclapped cheeks were such a waste, but with those kicking and screaming bird brains, his night was already ruined. In the next couple of days, Su Chen's deliveries start pouring in, and he directs them on what to do with each one while Holio goes running to Xiao Yu to report what Su Chen is doing. Xiao Yu wonders what he could be up to when Li Na notices the banquet tables being brought in. When they see the red carpet and careful setup, Li Na suggests that Su Chen must want to propose to her, and then guests would come from all directions. Xiao Yu likes the sound of that and gets all cocky about whether she'd even accept. She goes over to Su Chen and asks why he's buying so many things, so he asks her to help move all the items and he'll tell her once they're done. Xiao Yu takes offense since someone as delicate as her shouldn't be doing slave work, but Line tells her that it's probably just a test to see if she qualifies to become a rich lady. Xiao Yu immediately switches to her true Neanderthal form and lifts the box, thinking it'll all be worth it when she proves herself and Su Chen marries her. Unsurprisingly, Line offers to help too and bends over to show him just how much she wants to help with, thinking that she can at least cash out on the side. Su Chen simply looks at the buffoons approvingly, knowing that he can't possibly pass up the free labor with how much stuff needs to be moved. Later, they finish moving the items inside, and as Xiao Yu trembles from exhaustion, she swears to make all his money hers for making her work all day without food. Not that it matters, but Lynette is also exhausted and bitching over how heavy those blocks of ice were. Xiao Yu expects that now that the test is over, she should be becoming a bride any second now. Meanwhile, Su Chen then thanks the delivery men for their hard work and hands them all a token of his appreciation, assuring them that the rest of the funds will be settled within a week according to the contract. The men excitedly accept and leave while Xiao Yu comes up behind him and asks if there's anything else he wants to announce. Su Chen thanks the girls for being his pack mules and informs them there's no pay, so they can leave. Xiao Yu snaps and tells him he must be joking, so they should just get married and live a good life. But Su Chen breaks the news that not only did he sell the house, but he's also in a shipload of debt. Li Na interrupts and says that's impossible since he was able to pay for the banquet and the items they spent all day hauling in. However, Su Chen explains that he was simply helping out one of his bosses who wanted to bring people to the Alaskan Poverty Alleviation Project. Xiao Yu's face switches up as she launches at him and accuses him of lying this whole time. Su Chen moves out of the way and says he never lied to her, but it's too late. Xiao Yu's already switched to her snake face and starts cussing him out and saying he'd never be able to marry her. However, Su Chen coldly asks her who would want to marry a gold digger anyway. The girls summon their shared brain cell and decide to leave, swearing that he'll regret doing this to them, but as they leave, Su Chen chuckles to himself, knowing they'll be the ones regretting when the apocalypse starts. Now that he's alone, he shuts the warehouse doors and activates his infinite storage, and begins sucking all the supplies inside. Later, Xiao Yu and Hoyu go running to Dahai, who tells Xiao Yu to stick with his brother so she'll have a good life. Hoyu tells her she should never have been with that dumb and assures her that his brother would take care of things and get revenge for her. Xiao Yu walks off with him, thinking he's not a bad plan B thanks to his brother, till they suddenly hear Su Chen's voice from behind, calling her easy. Xiao Yu is shocked to see him while Hoyu points Su Chen out to his brother as the one who clapped his earlier. Dahai recognizes him immediately and explains that he took a mortgage on the house and tomorrow is the repayment date. When Xiao Yu hears this, she thinks she's dodged a bullet since there's no way he can pay back in this lifetime, but Su Chen complains about simply trying to enjoy his meal. This pisses Dahai off, and he asks how he can be so casual when he should be trying to gather his money. Hoyu reminds his brother that they shouldn't be trying to collect the money and should just finish him instead, so the manager comes out to ask what all the commotion is about. Dahai insists that Su Chen kneels and apologizes to him and his men, so the manager looks back to ask what's going on, but Su Chen tells her not to mind the pests. Dahai almost bursts a blood vessel as he swears to make Su Chen pay. But before he can make a move, Khan walks in and asks why they're making trouble there. Dahai immediately recognizes him as the successful entrepreneur, who also has a wide network in the underworld, which means it would be unwise to get on his bad side. At the same time, Su Chen recognizes Kwang as Skull Crusher from his previous life. He was so badass that he even had Hell's Chef under his wing. Su Chen realizes that the Green City Hotel was one of the first places to experience the mutations, which is probably how Chen became Skull Crusher. Now, Su Chen's new mission is to steal that opportunity for himself. Afterward, Tong leads Duanye to Mr. Sun, who pours her a glass of wine. He tells her he's heard about her striking beauty and is excited to meet her. But when she clearly sees something dancing around the bottom of the glass, Duanye wonders what's going on. Meanwhile, Su Chen stands in his room with his own glass of wine and thinks it's ironic that Xiao Yu has ended up following him to this hotel, so he plans on settling the score. Outside, Dahai points out how much hotter it is this night and Hoyu agrees, which is why they're heading for the pool and the girls come out. One thing these idiots can't pass up is a chance to see girls in their bathing suits. The girls finally come out, but can't help but notice how unusually bright the moon is. Hoyo joins the girls and uses some cheesy lines about his love for her shining brighter than the moon. But Xiao Yu tells him it's too hot for such foolishness, and they should head to the pool. Meanwhile, Su Chen looks down at them in amusement, knowing what's about to happen next, and officially welcomes them back to the apocalypse. At that moment, the moon begins to rumble and emit some powerful heat waves, which causes the group's skin to burn, sending them running to the closest water source, while the fat one gets left behind. They book it to the hotel where their goons wonder what's gotten into them, but all they can manage is to scream about how hot it is. They finally notice a fish tank in the hotel, and all self-respect goes out the window as they dive in and begin to fight over the water. The goons ask where Dahai is, making Hoyu realize that he left his brother behind. Suddenly, they notice a Thanksgiving turkey crawl in, but it turns out to be an overcooked Dahai, who cusses his brother out for leaving him. Meanwhile, Mr. Sun asks Duanya why she's not drinking the wine, so Khan tries to change the topic and bring up the banquet downstairs, but Mr. Sun tells him to butt out and insists that no one refuses his wine. Duan Yi realizes Kwang is simply using her to get chummy with Mr. Sun, who is notorious for harming women. It seems she's his target for today, which means the wine must be spiked, and she absolutely can't drink it. Suddenly, the moon shines brightly behind her, almost blinding the men as they rush forward to draw the curtains, which are burning hot. Kong says there's definitely something off here, so Mr. Sun suggests they head downstairs to see what's going on, while Duan Yi breathes a sigh of relief. Downstairs, the manager does all she can to calm everyone down and assure them a rescue team is on their way, but the crowd grows restless with each passing minute. Reports come in that the temperature is over 70 degrees outside, and several people have been injured. Mr. Sun quickly calls the minister and asks for an emergency pickup, but gets denied because no one's available to make the trip, and he's trying to make sure the power doesn't go out. Meanwhile, Dahai is still suffering from his medium-rare condition, and they all agree he needs to get to a hospital, so he decides to call one of his men to come pick them up. When the man gets his orders, he leaves an underground garage and is surprised to see that it looks like daytime outside. Suddenly, all four tires burst from the heat, causing him to grind to a halt. The man calls Dahai back to explain the situation, saying they'll have to figure it out themselves as he's got to run back to safety. However, the man's shoe melts and sticks to the ground, causing him to trip and land on his face. There he comes face to face with a man who's been completely cooked by the heat, but when he tries to get back up, his face melts off and he releases a blood-curdling scream. That's the last thing Dahai and the rest of the group hear before the line disconnects. Meanwhile, as the chaos outside unfolds, the presidential suite remains around 25 degrees and Su Chen is tucked in and fast asleep. The next day, outdoor temperatures have risen to 75 degrees, while ground temperatures have reached 100 degrees. Hence the human barbecues who found out the hard way. News reports advise citizens to stay indoors due to the rising death toll. However, the city's power center can no longer withstand the intense heat and explodes. Dahai tries to reach his man, but when he still doesn't pick up, they figure he's probably dead by now. One of his men informs him that all the other rooms in the hotel are booked, so they'd all have to stay in this one. Xiao Yu and Li Nai start bitching about how they need separate rooms when the power suddenly goes out. The air conditioning goes out too, and with the temperature rising, they'd all suffocate if they don't do something about it. That's when Xiao Yu remembers there's a pool in Su Chen's presidential suite, and they can go take it over. Meanwhile, Su Chen darts around in his pool, remembering how in his first apocalypse, all the electricity went out, and no matter what they tried, they couldn't get it back up again. That's why he chose a room with a pool. But that's not all, because he also prepared vertical ACs and huge backup generators to ensure he didn't become a burnt offering. He adds some ice as well and relaxes, just as it hits the spot. He then starts to feel hungry, so he pulls out a nice, simple breakfast from his storage space and starts to chow down, wondering when Kang's opportunity will appear. At that moment, Su Chen hears Xiao Yu calling out from the other side of the door, so he opens up and cool air spills out, causing them to realize he somehow has air conditioning. Su Chen asks if he can help them with anything when Hoya points inside and snitches that he's got ice, electricity, and food. The girls immediately call him selfish for hoarding all this luxury to himself, while Hoya threatens him to step aside before they resort to force. Then Dahai reminds him that he owes him money and tells him to give up the room in exchange for the interest, or he'll throw him out. Su Chen pulls out a gun and shoots Dahai in the stomach. warning him that any step closer would result in his death. Everyone is shocked that he has a gun, and Dahai commends him for being a tough son of a bitch. But Su Chen puts another bullet in him and tells them to get out of his sight if they don't want to die. No one knows what to do, so Su Chen starts counting down to 3, which he's sure will get the job done. Meanwhile, there's a hungry mob downstairs asking the manager how the hotel has no food. She apologizes and explains that a customer ordered 1,000 tables for a banquet which was supposed to be delivered today. Mr. Sun cools himself down with bottled water and demands the food and water be brought to him regardless. But when the crowd sees how he's already hoarding the water, it sparks an outrage. War almost breaks out between the two sides when Dahai and his group stumble in, complaining that Su Chen tried to murder him. Kong notices it's a gunshot wound, which is impressive since most people aren't able to get their hands on guns. Just then Xiao Yu announces that Su Chen has a pool, air conditioning, and electricity in his room. The angry mob asks if she's telling the truth, and she assures them that she's seen it with her own eyes, and it's just like heaven. The crowd immediately storms off, desperate to steal the ice and air conditioning, while some kid nags his mom about wanting fried chicken. When they reach upstairs, Su Chen opens the door to find out what they want, and the breeze that hits their pores makes it feel like they've touched heaven. The crowd begins to beg politely, asking him to let them in and respect his elders, but that one kid spots the fried chicken of his dreams and starts running to it. However, immediately he steps into the room. Su Chen kicks the little glutton aside and sends him flying like the bag of potatoes he already resembles. Su Chen warns them to control their kids or else he'll do it for them, and the crowd is outraged and decides he doesn't deserve to stay in that room. They think since he's alone, they can force their way in, but when they try to force their way forward, Su Chen fires his gun into the crowd, and it hits one of the men in the head and ends him. He then reminds them that he may be alone, but they only have one life. Some days later, Oyo finds his brother's body outside and asks how they could abandon him like that, but the men break the news that he succumbed to his injuries and died, so Hoyu goes into a rage and declares Su Chen responsible. At the same time, Li Na and Xiao Yu are outside Su Chen's room saying whatever they need to try and get inside. They're already down to their underwear and offering to spend the night with him if he'll let them in. Su Chen opens the door and invites them, in which shocks them, but Hoyu rushes past them, hoping to take Su Chen out. Su Chen warns them that anyone who walks through the door will die, then uses Hoyu's face for baseball practice and knocks him back into the girls. The girls change their minds and assure him they're fine outside, so he tells them to get lost, and they drag Hoyu along with them as they run for it. After, Su Chen turns to his machine gun, knowing they were seconds away from meeting their maker. Later, some armored trucks arrive, and when the guests see the soldiers, they assume they must be the rescue team. However, when the soldiers go in, they only ask for an academician staying there, and when they identify him, they hand him an insulated suit and ask him to come with them. The guests start bickering and saying they can't just abandon them like that, so the officers tell them that the authorities already launched a rescue operation. Since midnight is the coolest time of the day, they're advised to rush to the nearest rescue point, so the guests rejoice that the government hasn't given up on them. Suddenly, Mr. Sun pushes past and tells them he'd pay 1 billion yuan for one of those insulated suits and immediate evacuation, but the soldier grabs him and tells him not to interfere with their mission to extract one of their geological experts. Mr. Sun calls out to Chong and asks him to grab one of the insulated suits, but Kimong stares at the gun and passes up the order. Just then, Xiao Yu tells the soldiers that a murderer is living upstairs hoarding supplies, and the rest of the guests back her up. One of the officers named Xiaofeng offers to stay behind and do something, so he takes off his insulated suit and promises to contact them when it's all over. Xiaofeng heads up with his gun to see who's behind this, while Xiao Yu plots to take over his room when Su Chen has been shot to death. Suddenly, Xiaofeng notices a camera, then the door opens, and a stun grenade rolls out followed by tear gas. While Xiaofeng struggles to see and breathe, Su Chen sneaks up behind him and knocks him out with a bat. When Xiaofeng comes to, he's been stripped naked and tied up. But when he notices the ice and air conditioning, he asks Su Chen who he is and how he accessed guns and stun grenades. Su Chen casually explains that he's a recent graduate and he picked up the equipment during a trip to the Middle East. He then asks if the government has set up rescue zones for the citizens to go to tomorrow, but Xiaofeng is shocked that he knows that much. Su Chen points out that being exposed to the sun for more than 10 minutes can cause fainting, so most people will die on their way to the rescue zones, but Xiefeng explains that they've got no choice. Thick blankets and coats can help to insulate the temperature, so if they can just avoid falling down, that should increase their chances. Su Chen holds a gun to his head, so Xiefeng begs to at least tell the people about the thick coat idea before he dies, so Su Chen releases him completely. He tells him he respects his efforts and will let him go this time, but when Xiefeng asks how he knows he won't call for backup, Su Chen reveals his surveillance torrent with facial recognition and machine guns. With that bad boy, no one in the room except for him will survive. But Su Chen points out that they have more important things to worry about, and Xiefeng says he understands. Later, the guests gossip about how the soldiers simply warned them about the blankets and left. Mr. Sun grows more irritable and takes it out on Kong and his men, but Kong remembers that they'd still need his connections in Shangdu. Otherwise, he would have cut up the fat pig himself. Just then, Su Chen appears and says he wants to make a deal with him and pours out tons of ice. One of Kong's men goes nuts at the sight and suggests they take out Su Chen and take his stuff for themselves, but Su Chen holds a gun to his head. Kong quickly calms Su Chen down and asks what deal he wants to make. Later, Chong and his men suck on the ice cubes desperately, and Kong suggests they pretend to go along with his demands and then find the opportunity to dispose of him later. Just then, Mr. Sun comes in and kicks Kong in the gut for trying to hoard the ice cubes, but this time, Kong isn't pretending to go along with it. Mr. Sun then notices Duanya in the corner still fully clothed and mocks her for still clinging to modesty in this heat. He grabs her arm and says he's finally in the mood, but Duanya face slaps him and tells him not to touch her. This angers Mr. Sun even more and rips her clothes right there, threatening to have his way with her in front of everyone. However, before he can put his stick in gear, Kong tells him that's enough. When Mr. Sun turns around to give him an earful, Kong plunges a knife into his neck and announces that he's taking control of the hotel. Su Chen watches from afar, satisfied that his words really pushed Kong to take action. Now Su Chen wonders if he's accelerated Kang's opportunity as well. Meanwhile, Mr. Sun's remains are dumped outside with the other dead weight. Back inside, Xiao Yu and Li Ne are back to trading their dignity for some ice. Kong demands that they have to do anything he asks if he does, then tosses the ice bottle to them. One of the men asks why they aren't headed to the rescue point, but Kong says it's better to rely on oneself. Besides, they're not sure if they'll make it there alive. The man then asks why they're keeping the cheap hooks around, and Kong says it might come in handy to have a few cannon fodders lying around. When the clock strikes midnight, Xiao Yu and Li Ne are wrapped in their thick blankets, ready to head out when the man breaks the news that they aren't going anywhere now that they've shared out of their supplies. He then reminds her that they've got to do anything they want and rips her skirt to less than subtly hint at what he wants. Meanwhile, the rest of the guests start heading to the rescue point, but it's even hotter outside than they imagined. Even with the boards tied to their shoes, they can still feel the heat from the ground, and worse, it's causing some of them to trip and fall. However, despite their screaming and melting right in front of their family and friends, no one can do anything but keep moving forward. In the apocalypse, you'd have to focus on surviving first. Back at the hotel, the dead meat starts to glow, and they suddenly open their angry red eyes. While that man is trying to crawl up Xiao Yu's skirt, the zombie men bust in and start heading straight for them. Hoyu asks if they turn into zombies if they're bitten, so Kong grabs him and tests the theory. He shoves him right at Mr. Sun, and Hoyu immediately begins to yell from how hot he is, and even Kong almost gets burned. Suddenly, Su Chen shows up with a sword and tells them to move aside. Kong thinks he looks stupid as hell, but if he manages to defeat the zombies, then they'll defeat him right after. In the apocalypse, corpses exposed to the sunlight will mutate, but they aren't really zombies since they don't spread any virus. They're more like drought demons. However, the drought demons have memories from their previous lives, evidenced by Mr. Sun's corpse going straight for Kong and ignoring Su Chen. In the previous life, Mr. Sun was probably the first drought demon, which means this must be Kong's opportunity. Su Chen slices through the walking state and reveals a crystal nucleus that can bring about a superhuman physique. Now that Su Chen's got what he wanted, he leaves the Dahai demon for them to deal with and heads back to his room. Desperate, Kong continues to use Hoyu as a human shield, and once that doesn't work, they start hurling bottles of water to stop the creature. Meanwhile, Su Chen pours the crystal nucleate into a glass and remembers the instructions to swallow directly. He chumps its contents down, and his eyes immediately begin to glow as his body absorbs the energy from the crystal. Su Chen screams out in pain as his body grows so much stronger that it rips off his clothes and leaves him naked. Downstairs, Chong and his men manage to take down the beast along with his useless younger brother, but they lost their last water source in the process. One of the men catches Li Na trying to sneak out of the hotel and threatens to chop off her legs for it. To save her skin, Li Na says she knows a way to deal with Su Chen in exchange for letting her go to the rescue point. She explains that Xiao Yu is Su Chen's fiancé, and if they try to hurt her in front of him, he'll rush to save her and they can ambush him. Xiao Yu can't believe that her friend would sell her out like that, so she offers to cooperate in exchange for some meat. The man says all the meat has gone rotten, but Kong has a dark idea and hands Xiao Yu a knife while the others hold Li Na tight. Xiao Yu initially hesitates, but she switches off her humanity, grabs the knife, and walks toward Li Na. Li Na tries to beg for her life, but Xiao Yu tells her to cut the crap, since she tried to sell her as bait. She ruthlessly stabs Li Na in the gut, and even Chong and his men are shocked by how evil that bitch it is. At this point, Xiao Yu has descended into madness and can't wait to gut Su Chen and drink his blood too. Kong tells his men to have Duanye prepare the meat, and though they're kind of grossed out by the idea, Kong tells them to do as he says if they don't want to become corpses themselves. Meanwhile, Su Chen embraces his new superhuman abilities and can feel his body becoming more resistant to the heat. Suddenly, Su Chen notices Duanya at the door. Now that everyone's gone crazy downstairs and it's no longer safe, this is her only chance. Su Chen opens up and asks if everything's okay, but when she sees his tennis racket out in the open, she scolds him for being a scoundrel, forcing him to apologize. Once he's decent, Duanya pitches herself as not only an excellent chef, but also an experienced medical surgeon. Su Chen claims his resources are limited, so Duanya offers to do anything he wants just so he doesn't kick her out. Su Chen immediately agrees to the offer, and Duanye realizes she might have come off a little too desperate. But it's too late and Su Chen warns her not to misbehave. Once she agrees, Su Chen asks her to take off her clothes. Later on, Duanye takes a shower, excited that she no longer has to worry about the scorching weather or being eaten. However, though this room seems like heaven, Su Chen's no saint. Just before this, Su Chen had made her get on her knees so he could give her something special to eat. However, Duanye had prepared herself for this, and even now, the creepy bastard is watching her shower, claiming it was to make sure she doesn't do anything improper. Once she's done, Duanye walks out in a hot nurse's outfit and asks Su Chen if it isn't too tight. However, when Su Chen gets a good look at her cheeks, he says she's just perfect. Suddenly, they hear Xiao Yu calling out for Su Chen to save her, followed by Kong's men threatening to break down the door. Su Chen heads for the door, but Duanye tries to stop him, explaining that they've already eaten Li Na and they could be next. Su Chen is surprised that they've already eaten someone, but he still has to stop them from breaking the door down. Outside, he sees Kong and his men have all mutated into red-eyed creatures with fangs. One of the men hides behind a wall to ambush him, but Su Chen stops his arm before the knife can get to him. He then twists his arm and takes the possessed clown down, surprising the other men. Xiao Yu breaks free and runs towards Su Chen, begging him to save her, but he grabs her by the neck and reveals her rabid form. In the apocalypse, eating human flesh causes you to mutate and grow fangs, and at that point, you're no longer human. Xiao Yu doesn't regret her refreshing meal and tells him she can't wait to taste his flavor as she tries to grab him. However, Su Chen kicks the bitch aside and knocks her right out of the building. She grabs onto the ledge and tries to crawl back in, but the temperature is so hot that it cooks her on the spot. Chong and his men decide to attack all at once, so Su Chen takes out one of the men with his gun, causing the other two to split up and not charge in recklessly. The man boasts of being stronger and faster now, thinking they have the edge against him, but Su Chen grabs him with his bare hands and smashes his face into the floor. Another goon comes charging at him with a knife, so Su Chen grabs the knife and slashes through him in an instant. Su Chen puts Kwang in a chokehold to end it all, but he looks to his left and sees Xiao Yu emerge in a form that's actually a glow-up from her human face. She jumps in and Su Chen realizes that her hatred was so strong that she mutated quickly. No matter. He snaps Kwang's neck and simply says he'll have to end her a second time, while the Xiao Yu demon roars loudly at him. Duanye can't believe Su Chen managed to take out all the men single-handedly, but that monster gives off a very dangerous feeling, so she tries to think of some way to help him so he doesn't view her as a useless burden. She gets an idea and grabs a whip to help out, But when Su Chen sees the hot nurse with a whip, he activates another sword that isn't meant for fighting and tells her she's just distracting him. At that moment, the Xiaoyu demon lets out another monstrous roar and starts charging right at Su Chen, who's caught off guard. Xiaoyu rips through his clothes, so Su Chen activates his berserker mode, and his body receives an instant power-up. Xiaoyu tries to sink her teeth into him, but when they don't pierce through, Su Chen mocks her fangs for only being sharp for gold digging. But it's his turn now. He grabs her arms, flips over her, and lands on her back. Then he pulls hard and rips those arms from her body, causing her to cry out in pain as he jumps back. Su Chen is sad that his plan to make her suffer slowly has been ruined, and he has to end her early. However, something interesting happens. Xiaoyu grabs one of Pong's men and swallows him whole, showing she's still the throat goat. She then regenerates her arms and becomes even hornier. Su Chen is surprised that she can regenerate limbs, so Duanya thinks he must be in trouble until he says it's a great development. Now that she's not so easy to kill, he can rip her apart over and over again, and this makes Su Chen feel things he can't describe. Xiaoyu stands aside menacingly till the real monster grabs her arm and asks to see how many times she can regenerate. He rips off her left hand, then moves to the right hand while she shrieks in pain. Next, he goes for her tail and legs and sends them flying while he steps on her. Her limbs regenerate just in time for round 2, and he starts ripping her apart all over again. Xiaoyu regenerates again, but this time her eyes are filled with fear, but Su Chen doesn't let up. He goes for the 3rd, 4th, up to 8th round. He decides to start ripping out eyes and tongues, and by the 18th round, he's gone for the internal organs too. Unfortunately, his luck runs out and she stops regenerating after the 21st round. Xiaoyu sobs as she asks why he would do this to her, but Su Chen shows zero signs of pity as he remembers how he was butchered in his past life, all so she could change tennis partners. He tells her it's for revenge and stomps on her head, ending her for good. Duanya asks if he's okay after that, but Su Chen asks her if she's ready. She wonders what he means, so he grabs her and reminds her that his extra sword still needs something to stab as a reward for being so heroic. The next day, outside temperatures seem to be normalizing. Xiaofeng and his crew stand watch at one of the rescue points when he notices a group of people approaching. Only, those aren't people, it's a zombie horde. Xiaofeng orders his team to evacuate the civilians while he holds off the walking dead. Meanwhile, Su Chen activates his berserker mode to go another round, but Duanya struggles to keep up with how many times they've done it already. Su Chen explains that he'll have to go out now that the temperature is back to normal, so he has to give her something to remember him by. She asks why she can't come with, so he says she has to obey his commands completely. Then he slides his berserk sword in, and at that point, she'll agree to anything. Afterward, Su Chen goes outside and pulls out an armored truck, hoping to get back before the seawater surges in. In his past life, the surge of zombies at the rescue points led to countless deaths of civilians and soldiers, leaving tons of military weapons lying around. That's how various factions formed. One of such factions tries to stop Su Chen now, but they don't know who they're talking to. Su Chen steps on it and rams the truck right through them. On his way, he sees that just like in his previous life, the subway station had collapsed, causing thousands of deaths underground. They're all zombies now, but unfortunately, since they don't all have crystal nuclei, it would be time-consuming to crack each skull one by one. Su Chen drives off and heads for his old university, which he hasn't been to since graduation. He sucks up his car and goes in, but is immediately stopped by one of those pesky factions keeping zombies as guard dogs. Su Chen tells them to let him pass in exchange for a chicken leg, and the men's eyes widen like they've seen gold. They tell him to toss it over, so Su Chen throws it to the ground, and they begin to fight like dogs, but none of them gets it cause Su Chen uses his thread to pull it back and say they don't deserve it. This angers the men and they try to attack, but Su Chen pulls out a gun and shoots all 3 of them. He doesn't recall there being these many idiots in his former life and wonders if his warnings have helped more people survive. Su Chen heads the Department of Reptiles and Snakes, which has been abandoned for a long time. Most of the snakes are dead, and the air smells of decay, but Su Chen finally finds the one he's looking for. Suddenly, some goons stop at the entrance and tell the person who's hiding to come out. Su Chen gets ready to kick more ass when he realizes they're not searching for him. Some silver-haired goddess comes out of nowhere and starts taking the guys down one by one without using any weapons. After snapping neck after neck, she finally takes them all down. so Su Chen holds a gun to her head and commends her nice moves. However, she knocks the gun out of his hand, jumps on top of him, and tries to twist his neck like the others, but is surprised that it doesn't budge, and she's only ended up giving him a free meal. Later, Su Chen ties her up and asks who she is, so she explains that she is Kang, captain of a special ops team, and advises him to let her go. Su Chen asks if she knows Xiaofeng, and this surprises her. He claims to have saved Xiaofeng's life before, so she eases up a bit. While Su Chen fries up some steak, Kang explains that after the zombie horde attack, Xiaofeng had led the civilians to escape. But some prisoners had snuck in and pretended to be ordinary civilians. They stole their weapons, broke into the school, and are now holding students as hostages. Now that they're all caught up, Kang insists that he untie her and give her a taste of his meat. After she's untied, Su Chen tells her to hurry up and leave, but before she does, she explains her plan to retrieve the stolen supplies so that the trapped college kids can survive. Once Su Chen learns there are supplies involved, he changes up and offers to help since Xiaofeng is his brother, then proceeds to pull out a rifle. Meanwhile, the leader of the faction sits in a room with bodies hanging behind him. He makes plans to storm the student dorms when the door suddenly flies open and Su Chen walks in. The men are shocked to see him and wonder how he got past the 20 guards outside, so Su Chen offers to show them how. He holds his fingers in the shape of a gun and goes bang, and sure enough, the man's head explodes. Everyone's jaw drops in fear, wondering what sorcery this is, but Su Chen tells them not to move or they'll die. Meanwhile, Kang waits on a rooftop for the next target, wondering how she lets Su Chen talk her into such a dumb idea to have her take out anyone he points out. Suddenly, the curtain closes, and when Kang tries to ask what's going on, all she hears are the goons figuring out there's a sniper on the roof. Kang immediately books it and tells Su Chen to stall for time while she heads over to rescue him. She hears the boss ordered his men to take him out and thinks she's too late and can only avenge him now. However, when she busts into the room, Su Chen tells her she's too late as all the men are already dead, and he claims there weren't any supplies their reality. Su Chen stole all the supplies for himself, and the boss's final words were warning him that the people behind him wouldn't let him get away with it. But Su Chen snapped his neck like a glow stick regardless. Now, Kang asks how he could take on these many men alone. So Su Chen claims that he's been exercising regularly, and since there were no supplies, the men were probably weak already. Kang worries about who could have taken them, and what will happen to the students now that they're gone. Su Chen considers sharing his loot if they behave, but for now, he tells Kang to follow him to the girls' dormitory, where Xiaofeng and the rest of the students are being held. Unknown to them, one of the bodies hanging was still alive, and the woman saw everything. Later, her colleague, Steele Fong, walks up to the building looking for that psycho woman, Ji. When they finally find her, they get her down and ask if she's finally done posing as a prisoner and found what she's looking for. Ji tells Steele Fong that she needs some of his comfort first, so he whips hard enough to send her into a messed-up pleasure fantasy. Now that she's climaxed, Steele Fong asks her who took his supplies, and she says it was a devil named Su Chen. Meanwhile, Kang and Su Chen reunite with Xiaofeng, who wonders what Su Chen is doing there. Kang tries to ask if he's really his brother, but Su Chen cuts her off and points out Xiaofeng's injury and offers to look at it. Xiaofeng explains that it's only a scratch, but for some reason, it seems to be getting worse. Su Chen explains that the zombie demons have bacteria and viruses under their nails, and without the proper medicine, the wound could be life-threatening. Xiaofeng says that medicine is nearly impossible to find at a time like this, but he doesn't wish to die, so Su Chen casually whips out boxes of antibiotics to solve his problem. Kang and Xiaofeng wonder where he got that much medicine from, but Su Chen simply calls Xiaofeng his brother. Su Chen remembers that in his previous life, a man in the military developed powers similar to a nuclear bomb and was called the God of War. If his guess is correct and Xiaofeng is the same person, then his investment won't be for nothing. Xiaofeng thanks him, but asks him why he really came all this way. So Su Chen warns them that the Great Flood is coming, and they'll need to evacuate quickly. One of the students calls bull and accuses him of trying to drive them away, so he can monopolize the school's resources. Su Chen recognizes the Karenist Fan King, a second-generation rich kid who likes to create gender divides. Fan King asks if he's hiding food in his bag and tries to grab it, so naturally, Su Chen smacks the wokeness right out of her. Amazingly, the rest of the students cheered him on as they're also tired of her bull and want her gone for hogging the dorm resources. Fang King loses it and threatens to find her dad and have them all executed for treating her that way. When she storms out, Kang asks if that was a smart move. But Su Chen doesn't intend to stop her from finding her dad in this mess. Meanwhile, Fang King keeps rambling on about the men in this country being beneath her, especially Su Chen, till a grimy hand grabs her from behind. It turns out to be Steel Fang, and he asks her where Su Chen is while his hand starts to feel around her body. Later, Xiaofeng and Kang waved Su Chen goodbye. Now Su Chen plans to focus on the King Snake's mutation and then harvest it so he can gain the ability to control water. Suddenly he hears a woman call out for him, and when he sees Fang King strung up, he sarcastically asks if she's found her daddy so quickly. Steel Fang introduces himself and says he's from the Federal Bureau of Evolution and is surprised that such a scrawny dude would dare to steal their supplies. Then Steel Fang opens up a van full of zombie demons and asks if he's prepared to die. Xiaofeng and Kang hear the noise coming from the direction Su Chen went in, so Kang offers to check it out while Xiaofeng keeps watch, but he refuses and insists on going with her. Outside, Steel Fang taunts Su Chen by asking him to play the hero and try to save his beloved classmate by kneeling and begging him. Su Chen says that's not impossible, to which Fang King tells him to quickly get on his knees to save her. However, Su Chen says there's a problem, causing Fang King to say he isn't a man if he goes back on his word. Su Chen explains that he is a man, but not one worthy of saving her, so she should try contacting her foreign gentleman instead. Fang King forgets herself and calls him petty for taking offense at her calling him inferior. In fact, she calls him a pathetic man and screams at him to assure him she doesn't need him to save her. Su Chen tells her to remember those words in a few moments and points to the horde behind. The idiot looks down and sees she's completely surrounded, and her legs have never looked juicier. The zombies start feasting and Fang King finally starts screaming for help, admitting she was wrong. Well, it's too late now, and the zombie demons finally eat dinner. Even Braceface is surprised that Su Chen didn't lift a finger to help her, but says he'll be joining her soon. He shows him the powder he uses to control the zombie demons, a technology from the Evolution Bureau. Su Chen points out that of course ashes would make them think he was one of them, and Steel Fang finally realizes what the ashes are made of and almost throws up in disgust. Angry, he sends the zombie demons to attack Su Chen, so he pulls out twin swords from his space and blasts past the horde, all in the time it takes Steel Fang to turn around. At the same time, Xiaofeng and Sheng appear to see Su Chen surrounded by Steel Fang and his zombie horde. However, when Steel Fang sees that his horde is no longer responding to him, Su Chen breaks the news that he's already dealt with them. At that instant, the zombies fall apart and Steel Fang almost shits bricks. Su Chen teleports behind him, grabs his muzzle, and demands to know who sent him. When Steel Fang refuses to answer, Su Chen begins to pull off his head. Steel Fang tries to beg for his life, but it's too late and it pops right off along with his spine. When Kang sees Su Chen clean up in an instant, she realizes it definitely couldn't be achieved through training, which means Su Chen is some kind of monster. On the other hand, Su Chen's tired of going all out against small fries and wonders where he can get a capable assistant. Speaking of assistants, Duan Yat is back in the hotel, replacing Su Chen with her hand while her mind does the rest. When she finally wakes up from whatever steamy dream she was having, she wonders why Su Chen isn't back yet. She continues to wonder how she can be of help to Su Chen, then grabs a gun, determined to become his right-hand man. Suddenly, she hears a noise coming from the next room, so she goes to check it out. No one's in the other room, but when she turns around, a zombie demon appears out of nowhere. Duan Yi tries to remain calm till she realizes there's a table behind, preventing her from backing up. She tries to raise the gun and defend herself, but the demon knocks it out of her hand and growls loudly, ready to feast on her. However, when it misses her and bites on a chair, she realizes that the demon can't see and is relying on sound and smell. Though she was lucky to escape that time, she's still too close to escape, and if she makes any sound, she's as good as dead. Her only hope is to get to the gun in time, so she stretches as hard as she can, but the table makes a creaking sound, which alerts the zombie of her presence and causes it to growl. At that moment, Duan Yi remembers Su Chen's words. Her beauty was not enough to keep her around, so he advised her to find the crystal cores in monster heads to prove her usefulness. Duan Yi gets a rush of energy and rams her shoe right in the demon's eye, which penetrates all the way through its skull. The zombie shrieks in pain, but it's not enough to take it down as it grabs onto her leg. Duan Yi doesn't give up either and fearlessly rams her shoe back into its skull, this time bringing it to its knees. Duanye wishes Su Chen could see that she really isn't useless, as she grabs an axe to see if the demon has any crystals in it. Meanwhile, the university evacuation is ongoing and Kang even had to call on her brother, Ming, to bring more troops for assistance. However, inside the university, Su Chen continued his plan of mutating the snake. He drops a large bucket of water, since water is necessary to trigger its transformation, and the snake is immediately drawn to it. Once it hits the surface of the water, its body mutates into a larger, more dangerous creature, almost like a dragon. It gets so big that it breaks apart the large bucket and towers over Su Chen, who is relieved that he didn't wait for the floods to mutate it, or that would have been a disaster. Su Chen considers keeping the snake as a pet if it submits to him, but it immediately tries to escape instead, making Su Chen leap in the air and try and stab it with his sword. However, the sword simply bends out of shape, showing how hard its scales are. Su Chen resorts to using his bare fists to knock the snake to the ground, but the snake evades him and wraps around his body to trap him as it prepares to attack. Outside the university, Ming catches his sister looking out for Su Chen and suspects she might have a little crush on him, but he warns her that if Su Chen stays behind, he'll die. However, Kang assures him that she's seen him in action and he's so strong, he's practically a monster, so she's sure they'll definitely meet again. Back in the university, Su Chen activates his berserker mode, reaches out, and begins to choke the snake. He then lifts the snake in the air and smashes it into the ground, where it finally breaks apart, revealing its crystal core. Now Su Chen can gain another ability. The next day, the Great Flood hit around the world and destroyed what was left of human civilization. Most of the university buildings were immersed in water, but now that Su Chen has absorbed the Golden King Snake's crystal, his body has undergone new changes and he can survive in the water. After coming in contact with water, his body developed scales, his eyes became more sensitive to light, and his strength increased too. Su Chen had hoped for a water manipulation ability, but being able to breathe underwater has its perks too. Su Chen swims to the surface, where he realizes the current's too strong to swim to the Green City Hotel, especially with all the debris. He then looks at the clear skies, meaning the volcanic eruptions haven't reached Shangdu yet. When the ashes reach the city, the doomsday winter won't be far off, which is why you need to enhance your strength to survive. In his previous life, Su Chen saw multiple factions emerge. The northern part of the city had the Golden King Snake and the female Corpse King. The southern part was taken over by the cannibalistic tribe of the Devourer clan. The west side was controlled by the Rat King and its army of rats, while the east was occupied by Skull Crusher and the Green City Hotel. Su Chen almost died at the hands of these factions countless times in his previous life, but now he's already taken care of Tong and the King Snake. The best way to survive is to find the remaining crystals, but the cannibal tribe has too many factions, while the female Corpse King remains elusive. However, he remembers that the University of Technology experienced a rat plague, which means the Rat King must be there. If he can get to it in advance, he can obtain the crystal core with less effort. Suddenly, Su Chen looks around and sees he's been completely surrounded while he was lost in thought. At the same time, two goons from the Bureau of Evolution cling to a pole in the middle of the flood when they notice someone swimming toward them. They can't believe their eyes, but it turns out to be Su Chen, who the Bureau sent them to monitor, so they plan to kick him aside if he approaches them. However, they notice Su Chen's moving insanely fast, and it seems like something's right behind him. That's when they realize he's been chased by more zombie demons who passed their swimming lessons. The men call out to Su Chen, warning that they're from the Bureau, so he shouldn't come any closer. Su Chen is surprised the Bureau's influence has spread this far, but it's the perfect opportunity to get some information out of them. He leaps out of the water and lands above the men, kicking one of them down in the process. His brother grabs him just in time and tries to pull him up, but they know it's not going to last since the dangling sibling is built like a donut. Su Chen demands that they tell him everything they know about the Bureau, but the men would rather die, saying others will avenge them. Su Chen commends them for having guts, but that's when the zombies reach up and pull the donut below. His brother sees this and jumps in after him, and now the two of them are going to die as useless zombie food. However, Su Chen goes berserk mode and uses his sword to take out all of the zombies in an instant, allowing the brothers to swim to the surface. Afterward, the men finally cooperate and reveal that the Bureau is at the University of Technology and is led by a group of researchers. When Su Chen hears this, he figures there's a connection with the Rat King and the Bureau, but the men don't have any more information. so Su Chen decides to find out himself. Meanwhile, Duanya luckily obtained a crystal core from the zombie and activated her powers, but now the hotel is flooding around her. Suddenly, a slimy creature wraps around her body, going to the most cultured places it could think of. After wrapping her, it tries to attack, but Duanya stops it with her bare hands. However, more of those creatures appear from nowhere and wrap around her tightly. She's bound so tight that she can't move at all, and can only watch as more of the creatures emerge. Duanya wonders how to unlock her abilities, so she remembers Su Chen saying she can't tell what ability she'd get from the crystal core. Back then, she wondered how she's supposed to use an ability she doesn't even know, but Su Chen told her to feel it in her body and environment, and try to master and control it. With these words, Duanya can finally feel it and uses her ability to find the creature's brain. She commands them to stop attacking her, and when she sees how slimy she is, she reaches for the axe to deal with them. She promises to cut them down like tofu, and then starts ripping through them continuously till there's none left. After she feels she needs a bath, and suddenly Su Chen walks up behind her and asks if she can join. At first, Duanya doesn't know who it is and carries her axe to defend herself. Su Chen commends her for being able to protect herself, and when she sees it's him, she jumps on top of him and tells him how worried she's been. However, as she holds him tight, she feels an unsheathed sword rubbing up against her and realizes he's butt naked again. Su Chen apologizes and explains that he had to take them off cause they were too dirty, but offers to go take a shower. Later, they both soak off in the bathtub, and Su Chen comments there's no place like home. Suddenly, he asks Duanya if she's unlocked a new ability. She's initially surprised and thinks he must have seen the fight, but Su Chen says he could feel it through the temperature of her mouth. Duanya wonders what in the hell he's talking about, so Su Chen changes the topic and asks what the ability is. Duanya says it's some type of mind control ability, and when Su Chen asks if it's useful for the flood, she suggests she practice on him first. Su Chen tries to ask what she means when she suddenly mind controls him and shows him the type of practice she means. However, Duanya sees a demonic aura flowing from Su Chen, and she realizes his mental power is not to be messed with. Now that Su Chen's been teased, he praises her ability and offers to make her practice till her legs go weak. That night, periodic clapping sounds were heard inside the Green City Hotel. Some days later, Su Chen helps Duanya practice her shooting and mind control abilities. Duanya wonders why he still has time if he's going to the university, so he explains that he intends to take her along this time to prove her usefulness. The next day, Su Chen and Duanya head out, and she worries that the hot bunny suit might be a little much to go out in. Su Chen assures her that even if she walks around naked, no one can do anything to her. She asks if he's been to the university before, and Su Chen says he last went there to see a friend, and now he wonders if he's still alive. Duanya continues to drive the boat till she suddenly slows down and announces they've arrived. The university is far less impressive now that most of it is floating underwater. Suddenly, Su Chen senses danger as a guard begins to fire rounds at them, so Su Chen holds on to Duanya to protect her. The guard demands to know who they are and what they're doing there, so Su Chen claims they're there to join the bureau and asks them to open the gate. The man doesn't budge till he sees the bunny girl and tells her to spend the night with him while Su Chen goes back to whatever sewer he crawled out of. Duanya speaks softly and holds up a plate of braised pork in exchange for letting them in. The man immediately freaks out at the sight and instructs them to open the gate since he hasn't seen meat in ages. The gate opens and Duanya sails the boat right in while the man directs them to stop by the side and hand over the braised meat. When his colleague tried to point out something was wrong, the man insists on keeping it for himself, but it turns out that Duanya had been controlling him this whole time, making him think the demon hand was braised pork. Later, the man shows Su Chen and Duanya around the lower level, which has a lot of starving survivors. Suddenly, a kid accidentally bumps into them, so Duanya picks her up and discovers she's too weak from hunger. Duanya asks for her parents, and when the girl mentions that they both went to buy milk at the same time, Duanya offers her a piece of bread to help. The girl worries that she'd be making Duanya hungry too, but Su Chen overhears and starts bragging about how well this woman eats and even proves it on the spot. One of the goons appears and even mistreats the less privileged, wondering who's hoarding supplies again. The girl feels scared for not sharing, so Duanya promises to handle the men. Duanya asks if it's food they want and pulls out another meal. They don't go crazy for it, but it turns out Duanya has activated her power again. Will Su Chen collect the remaining crystal cores and truly rule what's left of the world, or will someone more powerful rise up to challenge him? That is it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.